Hi, Life Group leaders. Welcome to our lesson preview. We are excited about what is about to begin as we study the book of Ecclesiastes. And I, frankly, personally, this is a book I've wanted to preach through all of my ministry, and it's like the Lord never allowed me to do that or gave me liberty to do it. So I'm really excited for my class to go through it. And today, Brother Gary is going to kick us off, and Richard and I will be giving a little thoughts as we go along and encourage your people. This could be a really, it's a quick look, but it should be a really good study for us, okay? So, Brother Gary, why don't you kick us off?
All right. Well, it's good to be here again. Ecclesiastes is a different kind of book.
Yeah.
It's one that, frankly, I've never really dug down deep into. So I like the what you said. We have an opportunity to kind of sink our teeth in, look at this, and we know all Scripture's inspired by God. So there's obviously good things that we can get out of this.
Yeah.
However, we've got to be cautious because when you first start out, it gets pretty dark and deep and kind of gloom and doom. So we'll have to, I guess, be careful when we do that. Our lesson starts off in chapter 1. We actually start in verse 12 of chapter 1 in our book on page 68, 60, or 70 is the verse. But I would recommend you actually start in verse 1.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's where we're kind of, from what I see, we're presented with two people, kind of an author and then the teacher. And the teacher's 99% of the book is written from the teacher's perspective. And I think, Richard, you mentioned last time, I don't know what it says for sure, but all indications are there's only one guy who was the king and a son of David, and that would be Solomon.
Right.
And the way he is writing, it looks like, a lot of his style and everything. So he kind of begins the book with the ending at the beginning.
Right.
Vanity, vanity, or life is meaningless, and it's like, whoa, that's kind of a heavy way to start off. So
I think 38 times.
yeah, 38 times in the whole
it's
thing,
crazy.
and then the term under the sun,
Yeah.
and today what I would like for us to do is maybe just have a little bit of a discussion amongst ourselves. I think that's good to Richard will say something or give me a thought, vice versa with Brother Tom. So let's kind of use that style today. And so the word meaningless, well, first of all, if you go back, and I didn't know this till I was doing some research, the word hevel is the Hebrew word that's translated in English as meaningless, and if I look in the NIV, I see meaningless. If I look in King James, it says vanity.
Right.
So there's several different translations there, even in different words used in different translations for that word. I don't think it's really meaningless like we would say in a sentence to each other. It's more that the word here is like the meaning is hard to define. It seems like it's aloof. This word hevel in Hebrew is like smoke or a vapor or a mist or something. It's there, you can see it, but you try to grab hold to it and you can't. So
Substance.
it lacks the substance. So that's kind of what I see there. So what thoughts do you have, Richard or Brother Tom, anything as we kick off here on?
Well, kind of building on your point about Solomon going from, the writer to the author, goes from third person to first person.
Yes, good
I
point.
believe it's first 7 verses. He goes into talking about nature and the nature of things and of the world, and then he starts talking about, from a first person's perspective, about man. And he starts talking about his personal observations and experiences in verse 12. I think that's kind of interesting, and with respect to the verses before we get into the lesson.
Yep.
So.
Well, to follow up on the vapor mist thing, a seminary professor said it this way: that's what is left when you break a soap bubble. There's nothing. And I thought that was kind of interesting. It's just something, like you said, you can't get your hand on, and there's such a brevity to it, but there's a lack of substance if you don't understand it. when I began jotting down some thoughts, and we'll be interacting as you said, Gary, but here's what I started with. I said, life is a pain and life is a pleasure. It's all a matter of your perspective, depending upon your view of God. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we'll be unfolding over the next several weeks. Is perspective is so very important when we talk about substance of life.
I completely agree. Again, a great opportunity in our class to have good discussion about what's life all about. Why am I here? What's the purpose? If, like the teacher says, if life is meaningless, well, is it meaningless to everyone or just some people? These are some pretty important questions I think that every individual needs to kind of come to grips with. There's little, one of the gentlemen I listened to said there's little pop-ups throughout the book. There are little verses that kind of come alive, and it shows even in today's lesson that one of my sayings, there are two types of people, and it talks about life and its meaning or perspective from the God-fearing versus the sinner.
Yeah.
And so
I agree.
I think we really need it. There is meaning in life based on your relationship with God and your perspective. So we don't want to, as teachers or leaders, let the kind of the gloom and doom part of the teacher's way of delivering this be assumed that fits everyone, because it doesn't. If you back up and kind of say from the big picture of the book, and I didn't do an exhaustive study, but it does talk about, and I made some notes, kind of this whole march of time. You know, we talk about the cycle of life, and people come, people go, and in fact, that's been on my mind here. We've got a family reunion coming up that we haven't had in a while, and one of my cousins is big into genealogy, and you go back, and I mean, I can remember my grandparents very well, maybe a little bit of my great, but that's not too many years ago and beyond that. And that's what's kind of talked about even in Ecclesiastes, that generations come and go. The mountains are the same and the rivers are the same, but people come and go and are easily forgotten. And that's kind of depressing when you think about it. It's like, gee, are we that quick to be forgotten? And the answer is yes, a lot of times. So then it talks about this other deal that, we're all going to die, and that none of us escape here without going, through the fact that life is short and our days are numbered, and God knows. And then a third kind of aspect of Ecclesiastes, that there's a random nature, life's random nature. Some days ups and downs, and there's no formula, there's no recipe that you can say if you do this, this, and this, life's going to turn out a certain way. We just finished Job, and we know that good things happen to bad people, bad things happen to good people. There's no predictability a lot of times to life, and again, it's back to perspective. So any thoughts there, guys, on anything about what I've said so far?
Nope, I'm with you.
There's just one thing I would observe is that, as we go through life, we learn in primarily two ways. One, we either learn through our own experiences, and, we look back and think about, boy, I wish somebody had told me that before I had to experience it. Well, the truth of the matter is they probably did, but we didn't really learn it. I mean, some things can only be learned. They can't be taught. And I think that's a lot of how we approach our own experiences sometimes in our own learning. I know that's the case in my view. Or we can learn through the experiences of other people if we're willing to listen. And Solomon is one that he had it all. And he had it all. He had everything he could possibly want. And at the end, this was someone who lived his life without God. And he's talking about the vanity of life lived without God. And this comes on the heels of our study in Job. This is a person that lost it all, yet he lived a life with God. And I think if we look at the adversity that Job went through, and now the affluence that Solomon experienced throughout a lifetime, and Job's adversity was just for a season, but they both came around, and the message of both books is that God is who he says he is, God is always there, and we're all going to ultimately face him.
Yeah, I think if you
good
took
point.
the whole book of Ecclesiastes and you boil it down to what you like to do, Gary, so what? Basically, I jotted down this: it's the meaning of life with God, or it's the monotony of life without God.
Well said.
And I think that's when I see in Ecclesiastes, if God's not in it, life's monotony. You know, in fact, I jotted down, you can't find meaning in life under the sun with the created order. You can only find meaning of life with the Creator. And someone said it this way: living east of Eden is hard without God. And so, meaning of life with, monotony of life without, and in a sense, we have Ecclesiastes.
That's I like that how you said that. I recommend you guys use that in your class. That does come through. I made a note that it seems like Solomon's trying to teach us to live life and learn to hold on to things with an open hand. And I kind of like the visual. If you grip it tight, try to control it, and try to make things and force things to happen, it's meaningless. It's not, you can't. And so the only thing that we can control is our attitude and
That's right.
and how we respond. So I think that's very important. The first lesson again on page 70, and might just kind of look in our book. Start out verse 12. We'll have 3 verses out of chapter 1, then we have several verses out of chapter 2 that are combined. You see on page 70. But again, the little pop-up thing is what I call it, that you see in verse, what is that, verse 13.
13, yeah.
God has given people this miserable task to keep them occupied. So it's like, again, God's in this. This whole thing about life and working and toiling and this is not just by accident. It's God's order in the world. And then it goes down. He's, like Richard said, he's sharing some of his personal insights. But it does say, and I guess we can just use the word Solomon, he really set his, in verse 13, I applied my mind to examine. So it wasn't just kind of a lackadaisical approach. He really, really, really put his effort into and his wisdom and study to try to come up with the answers to what's life's all about. And he goes through and makes some observations about work but I really do like the verses 24 through 26. I think again I'd recommend that you kind of make that your capstone of the lesson on Sunday.
Verse 25 especially.
Yeah, exactly. So let's just read those. There is nothing better for a person than to eat, drink, and enjoy his work. So this is Solomon saying, and I like that. It's good to have a good meal and sit and enjoy and visit with your friends and family. He said, I have seen that even this is from God's hand. So there is joy and enjoyment, because who can eat and who can enjoy life apart from Him? That's what you said. That's the key.
Powerful,
that is powerful.
Yeah.
And I see that, and we've seen that. I can use a lot of examples. I think of a friend who has lots of toys and lots of material possessions, but he doesn't have God, and he's another hot rod in the garage or another bass boat or what. I mean, those things do not bring happiness at all to him, because he's without God. Nothing against bass boats, Brother Tom, but anyway, it's really our perspective. So
I call it visitation, so I can go out on visitation.
yeah, so I like this too. It says, for the person who is pleasing in his sight and God's sight, He gives wisdom. God gives us wisdom, knowledge, and joy. There's that joy. But, again, the other person to the sinner, and this is kind of sad, but he gives the task of accumulating and gathering in order to give to the one who is pleasing.
Yeah.
So,
We leave it, don't we?
yeah, it's all this cycle of life we know, and we think about inheritance and wills and family estates and those kind of things that we see come and go and pass down, and from and even other people who work hard, but their reason for what they do is misdirected, and they don't
I
have
think
that.
Jesus, didn't he say one time, the essence of life doesn't consist in abundance, you know?
You're
Exists in
exactly
God.
right. Exactly right.
I found it interesting the way that Solomon came to regard all that he acquired. And if you look at chapter 2, verse 18, it says, I hated all of my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will
Yeah.
come after me.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you contrast that with Paul and what he says in Philippians. This is in chapter 3, verse 18. I'm just going to read it. He said, I count everything as a loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. For his sake, and you all know this verse, for his sake I have suffered the loss of all things and count them as rubbish.
Right.
And that's a cleaned up version of what he really said.
That's right.
And in order that I might gain Christ. And so if you take those two verses, what you really can see is Paul counted it as rubbish because he saw it as all of the gain of the world as a distraction and a diversion from gaining everything in Christ. And then you see Solomon, who spent all these years, all his life, getting all of this stuff. And remember, he was the wisest man that ever lived up to that point.
Right.
And the wisest thing he ever did was ask for wisdom. But even he came to realize all of the stuff that I put my life into, sunk my life into, I'm going to hand it over to somebody and I'm going to leave it.
That's right.
And I just think it's interesting, the view of Solomon about things, and sometimes a lot of us about things, in the view of Paul.
That's good.
I don't know about you, but the most contented people I know are not the ones that have everything. That's not to say that rich people can't be content, but I say it to think that we're going to find the same emptiness that Solomon found if we put everything into that.
If we don't have God.
Yeah.
One thing that I thought was interesting is I was kind of reading through this, kind of jotting down some things. And he was talking about leaving it to comes next. I'm going to gather it all, work all, and then it's vanity because I'm leaving to whoever comes next. Well, if you, in life group leaders, you may want to do this. You might want to look at Solomon's son because Rehoboam was not a good dude. Right. And so Solomon accumulated all this, and he left it to Rehoboam, his son, and it was through Rehoboam, the son, that the whole nation split and was divided. So I thought that kind of struck me as I read our text is, I don't know if he had an idea of what was coming, but history proved itself.
Yes. Because
his next generation just kind of ruined it all,
That's true. In fact, both of you said things that made me think, well, even you see that little car tag says, I'm driving my child's inheritance.
Yeah.
So some of those things too that we work so hard, and I think it's easy. We got to be careful as Christians not to get caught up in bigger, better, faster, shinier, whatever. And in the book, there is a clear distinction kind of from the secular world and then the heavenly. And I think Solomon kind of drifts back and forth in his writing. So sometimes he'll view everything under the sun, and then he talks about God in the next verse. So we need to be aware of that as we go through.
Perspective, priorities. Maybe we should add priority to that.
Yeah, that's good.
Perspective and priority gives us a good handle on maybe the substance of life.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about happiness and contentment, I mean, we all like to have certain things and certain things we don't have to deal with because of what God's blessed us with. But here was Solomon, the wisest and richest man of all time, up to then. And then you have Paul come along, who had nothing. And what does he say? For in all things, in prosperity and poverty, I've learned to be content in all things. And then even further from that, we know that the Lord Jesus on this earth didn't have a roof over his head, didn't have a place to lay his head.
That's right.
The clothes he had on his back were gambled for at some point. So he lived without all of these things on earth. And of course, he is now seated at the right hand of God for all time. And for us as Christians, no matter what we have here on earth, we should rest in the comfort and assurance and contentment.
That's right.
That because he paid it all, we have it all. And I think that those are sometimes people lose their focus. I've got to get this because somebody else has it. I can't be happy
Unless
because
I
they
have
have
it.
it.
Yeah.
You know, and that's why the wisdom of the world cannot comprehend the contentment of Christians.
Yeah.
That's right.
I mean, their just focus is totally different.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And we know without saying, we are so spoiled, you know. We have power windows and air conditioning and creature comforts that most of the world doesn't have. And and we do know that happiness does not come from more things. In fact, there's a whole different lesson on for every asset there's a liability. You know, it seems like when that happens. So again, good opportunity in our class to kind of preview the entire book and priorities, where we're at, the perspective that Brother Tom mentioned. Two types of people, it says here, what happens to the joy, the wisdom, the knowledge God gives those who trust God, and to those who don't, that are working hard every day. Their reward is basically to pass on what they've earned to the next generation. And so there'll be a lot of good opportunities for discussion on that.
One
What
thing,
else?
I'm teaching this week, Life Group leaders, and here's kind of how I'm going to approach, I think, my lesson. If you were to take that Ecclesiastes, and we talked about the summation of it, you know, meaning of life with God, monotony of life without God, and as you work through Ecclesiastes, you're going to see that Solomon talked about wealth, he talked about working. He talked about wisdom or the lack of wisdom. He talked about the world and how the world can't satisfy. Well, as I was working for today and then for Sunday's lesson, I came across a little commentary set, and it's a current commentary set. And the guys who wrote that commentary had a great analogy that I'm going to use, and I just think you'll resonate with it. Your students will if you choose to go this route. And they talked about that movie Groundhog Day. Remember, it was 1993. It was Bill Murray. He plays the part of a weatherman by the name of Phil Connors. And Phil Connors is required every year to go to that place, I can't pronounce it, in Pennsylvania, and cover Groundhog Day, and he hates it. And the frustration's easily seen. He calls that groundhog a rat, and he keeps having to go back and write about it. In fact, some of the folks that really liked the movie said it may have been like a 30-year period that he had to keep going back. I don't know that we know that from the movie, but he begins to relive Groundhog Day, and he can't get past it over and over. Every day's Groundhog Day. And so he tries to learn how to cope, what to do. He tries to find, and I've jotted down here, the meaning and the happiness in life from different experiences. And so Phil Connors, first of all, tries hedonistic pleasure. He denies himself nothing. If he feels good, he does it. He reaches and grabs it. It could be food, could be drink, could be women, but he tries all the hedonistic pleasures. And at the end of the day, February 2nd, he goes to sleep, wakes up, and it's Groundhog Day again. Then he tries greed. He actually, I think, an armored vehicle, he robs it. He has all this money to buy, and he buys and buys and buys. And at the end of the day, he goes to sleep, and he wakes up the next morning, guess what? It's Groundhog Day, okay? So then he goes the route of despair. And I don't remember the movie totally, but apparently he tries to commit suicide several times. But he'll go to sleep, and the next morning, guess what? He wakes up, and it's Groundhog Day. Then he tries knowledge. Piano, sculpting, poetry. He tries that. And he goes to bed, and he wakes up the next day, and guess what? It's Groundhog Day, February 2nd, again. Finally, he becomes content, in the current circumstances, and he's not frustrated with anything else. He just is content with the day, and the curse is lifted, and he goes to bed, and he wakes up, and guess what? It's February 3rd. And he says this to a girl that he's fallen in love with. I think maybe Ira, I'm not sure the name. He says, I don't know what will happen tomorrow. All I know is I am happy right now. Mm-hmm. Now, that's a silly movie, but I read that commentary, what those guys said, and I thought, gosh, I wonder if they got that from Ecclesiastes, you know. There is a current song, not a current song, a current for us when we were kids, that the group uses. Yeah, what's the name of that song?
Turn, turn, turn.
Turn, turn, turn. Yeah, you mentioned it before we began. Yeah. So, you know, there's a lot of analogies in life about Ecclesiastes, and I thought we might want to look at Groundhog Day and pull something from that, because actually I'm going to try to look at it, and I hope there's no bad parts. Yeah. And I'm going to use that in my lesson Sunday when I do it. I want to read you something, Life Group leaders, that I thought was good. I took a snapshot of it. Hopefully I can read it okay. And it was written by G. Campbell Morgan. He was a great, great preacher of years gone by. He had, I think, 5 kids. They all became preachers, okay? And he wrote a book called The Unfolding Message of the Bible. And he summarizes Solomon's outlook this way. This man had been living through all these experiences under the sun, concerned with nothing above the sun, until there came a moment in which he had seen the whole of life, and there was something over the sun. It is only as a man takes account of that which is under the sun, as well as that which is, takes account of that which is over the sun, as well as that which is under the sun, then things that are under the sun can be seen in their true light.
Yeah, good. I like that.
Man, that's a great statement from a great preacher. He all of a sudden understands there is something above the sun, which makes sense. So that which under the sun, he can come to terms with and deal with. So I think we're on a good journey. You know, Gary, thank you. And Richard.
I think it's good. In fact, that's a good way to wrap up today with that there.
Yeah. I tell you what I did. I just emailed. I set up a little class distribution thing, which I'm not very good at. I hope they get it. But I sent them out an email this morning and said, listen, I just got through studying for what we're going to be doing here. And I said to them, you know, all of us question life. All of us question the meaning of life. And I want to encourage you to come, because over the next 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, we might come up with some ideas that help us understand a little bit better the meaning of life. And Life Group leaders, I would suggest, I know it's summer, vacations, all of that, but I would suggest each of you contact your students and say, listen, kind of send them an email like I did. This is pretty important for us. And we can get some really good stuff, some good nutrition for life. Okay?
Very good.
That's all I got.
Anything else?
Nope.
I think that was good. Good way to wrap us up, Tom. With that, we wish you guys a good week and good success in our class next Sunday. So have a good rest of your week. Thank you very much.